It's really, at this stage, driven by the vision that we can do a better job as a collective species of aligning our monetary incentives and systems with planetary and ecological health.
Welcome to the Regeneration Will Be Funded. I'm your host, Matthew Monahan, and in this series, we're having conversations about regenerative finance, technology, and our living planet. How can we build an economy that's in service to life? Brought to you by Ma Earth. You can find all of our conversations at maearth.com. Thanks for joining us. Welcome. In today's conversation, we're doing something different. I'm in the hot seat, and my brother, Brian Monahan, is the host, interviewing me. He asks me questions about Ma Earth, where the project's going, what we're learning so far, some personal questions, expresses some skepticism and some hard-hitting questions about these topics around crypto, climate, carbon markets, and much more. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Let's dive right in with, well, me.
Welcome. Today, I'm so excited to be here with you, Brother Matthew, as we turn the tables, we get you in the hot seat, and we get to ask you questions about Ma Earth and this podcast and the movement and the regeneration that you've been exploring over these last several months. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to ask you these questions.
Yeah, thanks, BMO. I'm here for it.
Oh. So today, how I was thinking we would arc the conversation is to start by talking a little bit more about Ma Earth, covering some of the core concepts, kind of understanding the framework, what your vision is for it, what it's all about.
Cool.
And then arcing from there, I want to talk a little bit more about you and get to know you a little bit more, share some stories, maybe a few laughs, kind of lighten it a bit.
Cool.
And then taking a bit turn in the end, I want to put on my skeptic hat and I want to try to ask you some challenging questions.
Awesome.
See if we can vet out some unquestioned assumptions and just see if we can push it a little further. That sound good?
Sounds great, man.
All right. So the first kind of opening question is just, what is Ma Earth?
Yeah, so Ma Earth is an emergent project, community, brand initiative, something that is still very much in its infant, nascent birthing stages. And it's really, at this stage, driven by the vision that we can do a better job as a collective species of aligning our monetary incentives and systems with planetary and ecological health. And there's a lot there, but that's, I guess, the best summation that I can really put to it at this stage. And importantly, it's not like a business with a clear model and plan and structure at this stage, because it's intentionally being loosely held in the spirit and the idea that we're at a stage in our collective evolution where what we need are community-led movements and projects and networks and emergent coordination. So there's some intention in that frame as well.
Yeah, you say loosely held, and one question I've had is, what is it that unites the indigenous activists in the Amazon with the crypto bros, with the hypercerts? And there is this breadth, and I've heard you talk about, there's a there is a thread that unites them. I'm wondering, can we just pull on that thread a little bit more?
Yeah. Well, I think what unites the, indigenous land defenders and the developers of hypercerts is, in many ways, a shared motivation for a better world and a better future. And we all have different contexts in which we're coming from. And so in order to create some initial structure and context within the Ma Earth broader initiative, the idea was, okay, well, why don't we start the party with an interview series? And the podcast format seems to be something that has a continued cultural momentum online, and I like the idea of independent media as a tool, and I really just wanted to meet a bunch of these people that I would see online or that I would look up to, or who are leading different efforts and projects. And I think there's so much nuance behind the headlines and behind the clickbait, of our time, to be explored further and to be wrestled with. And so much of my experience in this kind of climate movement space is that we are in a time of paradox, where we have to hold multiple truths and multiple contexts at the same time. And I think that if we can do that, it builds muscles of empathy and complexity and nuance and understanding. Because in my mind, we're all just kind of like locking arms and needing to lock arms and work together. And so that was the impulse to say, okay, well, let's do an interview series and let's start having conversations in that format. But rather than framing that as Ma Earth, we put a little bit more structure around it and said, okay, we'll start with a show. And then that way I can kind of like lean in on hosting a show. If nothing else, maybe we'll do a few seasons of it, and that'll be it. But there's other things that we hope to do and create and build with Ma Earth more broadly, and other directions that the project can take. And so the show is kind of its own piece of work.
And that first show is The Regeneration Will Be Funded.
Thanks. Yeah. The Regeneration Will Be Funded. We didn't even have the name when we started. So it was very much an emergent discovering and following the nose. And what I heard from a lot of people in the podcast world was, by default, just like stick to what you're interested in, because that'll keep you motivated through the slog. And I think that's been really good advice. So I'm following my nose, following my context, and we uniquely created a lot of the interviews around events. And so we would go to an event, we would kind of create a makeshift studio, squatting at some Airbnb, and then essentially pull people in and out. And it was based on the networks of people we knew. And so since you and I have spent, some of our time over the last decade in philanthropic contexts and nonprofit contexts, trying to support different projects and movements, we have this kind of unique network that spans a diverse set of people. And it's certainly not representative of the whole world or the whole movement. But we do know people doing indigenous-led environmental projects, and we do know tech folks doing, hyper-advanced Web3 projects. And so that's a little bit of what unites it. But I think back to the original frame, like, how do we align our economic incentives and our economic system with planetary health? When you and I moved out here to New Zealand, I felt like I almost had like this romantic dream of like one of our heroes, Buckminster Fuller, that somehow we would be tinkering in the shed, figuring out some like new inventions and coming up with some new ecological solutions. And I think over time, fast forward 10 years of stewarding land and a farm and kind of working on landscape scale regenerative projects, over and over, there's a lot of different problems in that stack, but over and over, I feel like I've been pulled back into the finance and economic challenges. Like, we know how to plant trees. We know how to fence off waterways. We know how to not cut down trees. We know how to do a lot of basic human activities that can care so much better for the land. But what we can't seem to solve is how to fit it within our economic paradigm. And so I've had this inquiry and this line of work around kind of climate ecology, environmental space for some time, with a background before that in software and technology. And one of the major technology shifts that we're going through is we have this new social computing, distributed network that we call blockchain, crypto, Web3, and that has a tremendous amount of surface area, I believe, for the environmental space and the environmental movement, and for how we're going to reshape our systems and structures up and down the court to be more in harmony with the planet. And yet I don't see a lot of conversation about it in terms of mainstream crypto or in terms of mainstream environmental movement. And so, yeah, it's just been kind of this, like, these two parts of my context coming together, going, oh, I really want to try to bring this together a bit more and explore this, where this Venn diagram is meeting, and also elevate the voices of people who are working on these things, because certainly there are people seeing this, but maybe their voices aren't yet being heard or distilled to a great degree. So that's a bit of the journey.
Yeah, great. It does seem that it's that Venn diagram of crypto and ecology. The overlap is not huge yet. Right. So and sometimes I've teased you that you've interviewed your entire audience. Yeah. And I wonder, who do you think this is for? Who's the audience? Who are you making this for?
Yeah, I think so. One philosophy has been to learn out loud.
Learn out loud.
Learn out loud. And that really is part of the ethos of the Web3 open source space. I got a lot of inspiration from the Gitcoin community over these last few years of seeing just how much transparency they were leaning into, in terms of, you could click through a Discord and then click a product spec and then go into a community call and then speak with the developers who are building the next module. And compared to the experience of building a traditional VC-backed software company in Silicon Valley, it's a radical evolution. And I think that there's a lot of patterns there. When you and I moved to Silicon Valley, part of the context was this is where the new ways of work are being created. Google doesn't require people to wear collared shirts, and you can define your own hours, and they're serving meals 3 times a day in the office, and there's a campus, and that was kind of a radical notion, 20 years ago. And I think that Web3 is introducing new cultures of what it means to work together in kind of a sense that there's still economic livelihood being drawn from these projects. And so part of that ethos is an openness and a transparency. And just I don't selfishly want to just keep all of the, a lot of these interviews and conversations, they're not something that I can necessarily follow through on or act on in any meaningful way. But if I can kind of help to just frame and capture it and then share it for whoever wants to watch it, fantastic. So that's been one driving philosophy of the audience, is I don't know, but whoever's interested. And a second is, very intentional, which is to get the party started from our Earth. And I want to work with high performance teams and people who are also in this space of where climate ecology is meeting crypto, Web3, other advanced technologies, and other aspects of the environmental movement. And I think this is going to require a lot of us, like I said, locked arms, holding hands, working together. And we have resources. I have energy for it, and a long-term view and perspective on it. And so who knows what the future holds, but it's kind of a call out to say, okay, who's interested? Because
come join the party.
Come join the party. And it's starting intentionally very niche and very specific, with no expectation that we're going to have 2 million views on Instagram tomorrow. But I think that people who are embedded in this conversation or thinking about this, this is the content that will attract them. I hope. So that would be my other main comment on audience. Over time, what I've learned is that there is a very rapidly growing climate tech, climate finance space. I wasn't as connected to all these like carbon markets and then all the companies and projects in this space nearly as much a year ago. And so now I understand like there's a lot of humans doing a lot of work in these fields. I think that a lot of this stuff is relevant for them. And obviously environmental organizations, people who are in the environmental and climate movement, especially those who may not have had much resonance with the crypto and Web3 space. I'm intentionally kind of trying to be like, hey, I think there's something over here. Let me offer a frame and a lens that starts from a more ecologically motivated standpoint, and explain how I think that this could connect, and try to just bring a little signal to the noise of the crypto space, because it's of course been extremely noisy. And then I guess the last comment about audience would be, because we didn't do like paid advertising and we didn't have like a starting follower base or anything like that. The audience so far has been organically driven by the guests who've been on the show, and the ones who go out and promote it and say, hey, listen to this interview I did, or watch this program. And I have to pay huge acknowledgments and appreciation to all of our guests so far, because they're the ones that have really kickstarted it. And again, that's what the idea is like, this is a network, this is a community, and if I can help bring really high production quality collateral for them and their teams and their projects, and to elevate those ideas that they want to share, that feels like a service to the regenerative economy movement. And so I want the work to be complete in and of that. Like, even if we don't, if Mount Earth doesn't do anything else, I'm hoping that like, okay, great. Now this person who's doing a lot of great work in the space, or has some specific idea or vantage point and so forth, like they can help spread that idea, amplify it online using the tools of our time, and that we've given them a nice piece of collateral to go with it.
Right. And I sense a few threads there that really distinguish this from most other sort of podcasts or social media activities. One being that you're not seeking to necessarily just audience capture, build a huge number of followers to start doing promotions for NordVPN or whatever, right? Like you have.
Well, I'd like to take this moment to tell you about athletic greens. I take my athletic greens every morning. Sorry. Yeah. No.
Exactly. But I mean, and that is the business model that pulls a lot of these things, and therefore defines what are the conversations which can happen, because they have to have a certain amount of scale. But that often requires a compromise in depth and in nuance, like you said, or a major compromise in production quality and the like. But you're able to sort of get past that by having this alternative model, which is sort of gift financed, but also building towards something else, right? You say, it's get the party started. Well, that's the start. Where's the party? And you talk about learning out loud, but learning into what end? And so, where do you see it going? Like, where, if you think out a couple of years, maybe paint us a little bit of vision of where this might go.
So I want to be useful to the movement, to humanity, to all the other species on the planet. And it's not always clear, even 6 to 12 to 18 months out, exactly what's going to be needed, because there's so many people who are sensing the ecological crisis as one vector that we're in, and then working on different ideas and solutions and so forth. And so, I think we are in this evolutionary paradigm shift where it's like, okay, it's not just, hey, here's my C Corp and here's my competitive silo, and I'm going to go, win this part of the market and da-da-da-da. It's like, okay, you got that piece, great. I'm going to get this piece. Okay, cool. You got that one. And then like, an intentional ethos to make sure that they work together really well.
Mm.
So a lot of the sense making for me over the last year and still happening is to understand who's got which pieces.
Mm.
And then how do I align my gifts and my context and my skills to the pieces that may be missing?
Mm.
And the people I'm working with, what do they bring? And how does that fit in, right? The production quality that I referenced of the interviews, like that is purely the function of these two guys interviewing us right now,
Mm-hmm.
Jeff and Dave,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like I've known this team for some time, I don't know, 20 years, 15, 20 years. And so when the idea of an interview series came up, it was like, great. Hey, Sean, what do you think about working with Jeff and Dave and doing some of these interviews? I know nothing about any of the hardware involved here, any of the editing. I've never recorded, content in this context before. Identifying that we had a real strength and gift for potentially bringing a higher production quality in a lean way into these like kind of makeshift event environments was just trying to listen to what were the skills and capacities that we had access to and what was something that we could potentially contribute. And it's been really gratifying to have, amazing environmental ED nonprofit leaders who have been building their organization for 15, 20 years say, we actually don't have anything like this where I've been able to tell the whole story in an hour with really high quality video and so forth. And now we have clips and social media, and so that has then pulled us into like, okay, well, let's invest a little bit more in that area so that we can lean into that.
Right.
So I think that's the media side. Happy to kind of talk about a bit more broadly.
Well, I really, it brought up two things. One is when you reference the production quality and the image that people are going to get on the other side of the screen. What brought up for me was beauty. Like when I watch the Ma Earth channel, what I experience is a certain level of beauty.
Mm-hmm.
And in a time where a lot of the conversations are about challenges, I want to explore this concept of beauty and aesthetics and style. I'd love to hear just how you think about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, Ma Earth, the name, I had the idea for the project that was kind of persistently gnawing and bubbling for many years. But it was nameless. And I have to pay acknowledgments and respect to Yael Morantz, who came up with the name Ma Earth. And she also really brings a strong creative and aesthetic frame, which again is not my natural skill. And so when we were speaking about like, okay, well, how would you create a visual, representation of this? And then she's like, Hans Valor, like we need Hans to do the art and the design of the brand. I said, well, yeah, and we have Ty Kenning, who's been a close collaborator, friend for 15 years, on our projects at Inflection and through the Edmund Hillary Fellowship and through, Biome Trust and so forth. He's an incredible production designer and master of many different skills and trades. And so, yeah, we kind of approached Hans, approached Ty, sat down, kind of figured out, what would a brand look like for something that's still so amorphous and emergent. But it really started with people and a high value on aesthetics. And it's an incredibly difficult ongoing design challenge to think about the humbling truth that the climate space is, at some level, we're not achieving the aim of stopping ecological devastation and destruction.
Yeah.
And so if that's part of the context, then like we have to look at every piece and kind of question, is the narrative framing the right framing? Is the resonance with people working? And there's a lot that can be said about all of this, but one of those things is like, how do you make it cool? How do you make it fun? How do you make it sexy? How do you draw people in? How do you not just look like, grandma's conservation wildlife organization? Um, so yeah, I could say a lot more about it, but I guess it has been an intentional value on beauty, and also we want to show up for our guests and give them something that makes them look good, that they're really happy about, that they're proud of. And so that's kind of what fuels it at times, is like, okay, like that's worth that extra little effort because that person deserves it. Like we care about that person. We want that person to really have a meaningfully, high quality product at the end. And I like what one of our guests said. He said that, when he's trying to bring that quality of beauty and aesthetic and design to their team, it's because Mother Nature deserves it. And so I think that's like a really good rallying cry as well, just to kind of go that extra mile. Our friend Al Noor says beauty is an enabling condition. It's like an enabler. It's like what allows things to then emerge. And so, yeah, I'm on my own journey of kind of like calibrating to that and developing, skills and capacities in those realms of how do we make things just look really good, and, color arrangements and color theory and, spacing and design and all these set designs. And, it's just like kind of learning at the same time as trying to do everything else. And I still feel pretty, like fumbling around in a lot of ways. But it's really been, to whatever degree we've produced beautiful aspects of the project so far, as a big acknowledgement to Hans, Ty, Yael, Dave and Jeff, Sean, the whole crew.
Yeah, cool. I think that's really nice. And you say that you don't have a background in design per se, but I mean, I remember, Matthew, age 16, drawing the most intricate portrait of Mother Teresa. And I think it's still around somewhere. And it was
above my altar.
A devotional practice is how I experienced it. You were so committed to it, and it was almost a spiritual kind of relationship. And then I see the effort that you put into this and all the things you do, right? I mean, many people might not fully understand that you have like 3 other day jobs, that you're doing simultaneously. And you mentioned a couple of statements ago, you said, I want to be useful, right? And in this kind of second part of the conversation, as we sort of shift a little bit away from just talking about what is Ma Earth, and I want to really now, like, who is Matthew Monahan? You say, you want to be useful. Tell us more.
Yeah, I guess I'd summarize it like life is, I experience it as just a mysterious, immense gift. And I'm really grateful for that gift and this time that I have. And I feel, so grateful for the love in my life and the family and the friends and, the experiences and the adventure and the privileges and everything else. And I also experience the profound grief and terror of, what's happening on this planet to so many people and other forms of life. And we've had a moment to kind of pull up out of the water for air, out of the rat race, if you will, early in our lives, by just good luck, and to really take a look at what's happening, ecologically, historically, meet a lot of interesting people, have really incredible mentors, life-changing experiences, and I just feel this sense of like, wow, this is a really interesting moment in time. It's not the only interesting moment in time. There's been many other interesting moments. There will be many more in the future. And at some level, we're like, whatever, a speck in the universe. And there's a deep part of me that sees it all as like somewhat of a cosmic joke, and but I guess I just conclude that like, okay, here I am. This is my body. This is my breath. This is my time. This is my context. I don't know why if there is a why, like, I don't know why. But I want to follow the impulse and the through line and the information that's coming in and that's coming through me and everything else. And at this particular, juncture in my life, that's like, okay, like there's, I look at your daughters, I look at the suffering of people in the world. I think about the destruction of the rainforests. When I witnessed, glaciers just, collapsing into the water, and it's like I just feel this impulse and this energy and this response of like, okay, can I contribute to healing, to constructive, collective organizing to do things better? And I see that most humans on the planet are not able to get out of even the 9 to 5 or the struggle to just have their basic needs met. And I have that. And so, okay, what am I going to do with my time and attention? And what do I want to be in service to? And so let's be in service to life, and let's do the best we can, and not go too hard on ourselves. But I've got energy for it. So let's give it a best shot, and hopefully, at the end of life, whenever that is, the final moments will be complete, and it'll be like, yes, and into the mystery we go.
Heck yeah, I love it. I had that health scare a couple weeks ago, and I came to you, and I was kind of confronting my own mortality and really facing that, and you were really supportive of me personally, and you were imparting like that deep wisdom of that perspective of our place in the cosmos, and it feels to me like that probably gives you tremendous reserves and strengths to kind of stay open in the face of the collapsing icebergs and the dying rainforests and all of that. I mean, a lot of people will shut down. A lot of people will retreat, consume, addict. Certainly a lot of people with resources are just choosing to completely isolate themselves from the consequences of the actions that we are collectively taking. Why do you think that you are choosing this path? I know you say you don't know why, but like, maybe when do you remember that being clear to you? Like, help us understand why you've chosen a different path than so many of your peers from the Silicon Valley world that you came from before.
Yeah, and I would say, like, even though we can paint a broad stroke that like a lot of people with resources seem to be insane, I think that I resonate with that statement. And I also have rarely met people with tremendous power or privilege that aren't also doing their best and trying to figure it out for themselves, and operating from the context that they're in, and so I have a lot of empathy for everyone, and I think sitting in a seat and interviewing a lot of folks and having just all these different perspectives in kind of a rapid succession just continues to build that empathy. I guess what I would say is, like, our context has been so much a function of our ancestors and our place of upbringing, and we were just tremendously lucky to have incredible parents and an incredible house that filled with love, and a value set that was very similar. And so we're somewhat just kind of continuing the line and the legacy of like a mother who lives for children and wants to support everyone and every being, and a father who is in many ways a conservationist, an environmentalist, an outdoorsman, and loved the natural world. And so at some level the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree, and I think that a lot of it's simply that.
Oh, beautiful, man. I respect so much your commitment to service, like devotional practice. But we're all human. I know you're human too. and I know that it's not always feeling good. You know, I know there are tough times. I know there are times when, you know, you want to just push your screen over and whatever, right? So take us through how you deal with those moments, like when it's tough. Like, where do you go for strength? How do you deal with that side of it all?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just in general, there's certainly been highs and lows in life, and I feel like this year and since this project has started has been really fun and good. You know, it's been like a good year for my own like internal and immediate, you know, kind of context. I'm also present to lots of suffering and lots of challenges, you know, people connected to me, and like you a few weeks ago, like that certainly affects me as well. And but yeah, just in general, I would say like I'm feeling very, very good. Like a lot of times, like stress and anxiety and like difficult mental challenge moments. I've been amazed at how quickly you can really change your frame of mind if you change your environment and the routine habits and structure you're in. And so I remember once doing a practice where you write yourself a letter after an incredible detox retreat of yoga and good food and outdoors, and they mail it to you a year later. And simply like, if you get caught up in like a loop and you're like in a really negative space or whatever, just don't forget, like it only takes like 4 or 5 days to like really kind of change the whole state. And so just get out of, like, it's not worth it to stay in those places. Like whatever you do, just try to get out of it for a moment. And that's, again, like a very privileged thing to say. You know, not everyone can like leave their job for 5 days, but or their kids or their household or anything else. But I guess that's the principle that I try to follow when I feel myself kind of getting a little bit too into a negative spiral, which certainly can happen and reflects itself in, like, you know, addictive habits and numbing and things that I think are fairly universal, and isolation and, you know, like kind of unintentionally pushing people away and like all of those negative behaviors. Like I'm present to those tendencies in myself and have expressed themselves in different degrees over the years. But I think, like, yeah, starting with the physical vessel and kind of going, okay, like breath work, yoga, massage, water, juice, like whatever it takes to kind of just like start breaking the, you know, whether it's alcohol or smoking or overeating or coffee and etc. Yeah, just long enough to then like have a physiological reset, which then I think really helps the mental space. And then kind of like, it's amazing. You can just have like see the same exact situation and have a completely different perspective on it.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. And I wonder how you think about this experience of stress or kind of pressure and how that connects to the peril of our times, and how you and so many people in this movement feel this like responsibility, and especially with the freedoms that you uniquely have from not needing to work, you know, a normal 9-to-5 job just to survive. How does that experience for you? Do you feel it as like a burden sometimes? Does that cause you anxiety? And what advice might you have to other people who are feeling like, oh shit, I got to save the world? And then like all that weight that comes with that sort of responsibility. How do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I don't think any of us are going to save the world. So I guess that would be my first thought. But not because the world can't be saved or that, you know, we can't make a difference. It's just like we have to recognize, like, with some humility, how we're placed within the cosmos, like within a deep time perspective, within a universal context. Like, yeah, it's all about framing. And um, yeah, I mean, I'm certainly familiar with that feeling in our 20s of like, we're gonna put attention in the universe, and yeah, like, let's do the best we can. But um, if the path, it needs to be healed of like this savior complex, or this kind of like feeling of that your life doesn't matter unless you're doing something of extraordinary consequence. Like, I think there's a path of just softening that, and really, letting that kind of settle a bit. But I think that, more to your question about the climate grief and this sense of, it is certainly an experience. And I had a really strong at New York Climate Week, where you're talking to so many people who are really digesting the gravity of the climate situation through a lens of especially science, and kind of the recognition of how many cascading ecological tipping points are upon us that could fundamentally alter the conditions for life on this planet. If the Amazon goes from a carbon sink to emitting carbon, that's like a really big deal. If the sea levels rise, several meters, like that's a really big deal for coastal cities. If the weather patterns aren't stable enough to grow food in regions that feed hundreds of millions and billions of people, like that has consequence. And a lot of people still engage in the discourse at a very shallow level, and don't have like a visceral or even deep intellectual understanding of what's happening to the habitat on planet Earth. And so when you do spend time in that kind of headspace, and then you start to really feel it in your body, and then you kind of want to just go scream from the rooftops, like, red flag, warning, alert, alert. Like, are you guys watching this over here? And so, yeah, I think, what Margaret Klein Solomon said to me, a clinical psychologist who wrote a book about climate grief and has a really stark but stirring message for us on this, is that fear is not something that we necessarily want to just, avoid. Fear can drive us to response. Fear is very natural. Fear is part of our wiring. If you sense danger, and then you take action. So I think that we are for some reason really quick, and I haven't quite, settled on it, my own understanding, but fairly quick to like want to just be like, yeah, but there's reasons for hope and optimism. It's like every conversation, you see out there. Yeah, but I'm hopeful, but I'm optimistic. Like we somehow have this cultural thing of like, it's unacceptable to not be hopeful, or that whatever. Like it feels fairly shallow to me as a conversation at this stage. You see it in so many domains, not just the climate space. It's like, yeah, there's reasons for hope, and there's reasons for dread, and there's reasons to be fearful, and there's reasons to be excited. And yeah, you do get to choose like which energetic you want to intentionally place yourself, in, and that's important. But yeah, I think that if those of us who are more aware of the ecological dangers that we find ourselves in as a planet in these coming years and decades can really sit with and breathe and hold the grief, and work through it and cry and like grieve, that we're just much better prepared for being useful and helpful as the situation progresses. So feel your feelings. Like, I don't know, I'm not the best at it, but certainly seems like a pretty logical thing to do right now.
Yeah. Well, we just wrapped up a 5-day biome trust hui here on Mangaroa Farms, and you did such an amazing job of working with Jan to curate a really tremendous lineup of people and participants. And I felt that was one thing that came through really nicely, was simultaneously like a pretty clear-eyed, cogent look at the perils of our time, but simultaneously, after dinner and a long day of sessions, like the fire pit was going, the drums were running, there was still like a joyousness and a beauty and a vibration of not necessarily hope, not hope for or a destructive civilization that we live in that maybe must be composted, but a transcendence kind of hope, a transcendent connection that sort of bypasses that duality of, is it hopeful or despair? Right. Well, actually, there's something beyond all of that.
Yeah, it gets back to like its paradox, and you do a really great job of reminding people that, let's stay joyous and let's have fun while we go through this mud. Yeah.
The mud. That's another story for another time. Cool. So in that spirit of paradox, it was kind of maybe now shifting into kind of the third and final phase of how I thought this conversation would go, which is to sort of try to ask some probing and penetrating questions about some of the theses or assumptions. And I think you'll know where I'm going with this because we talked about it just the other day. Specifically, I guess the frame that I wonder when you talk about aligning the monetary incentives with the ecological systems, right? And the ecological wellness. Are they actually alignable when monetary systems sort of by their necessity are about flattening, commodifying, unitizing into these hyper-fungible units when that tree is not that tree? And are we perhaps perpetuating the very problem that we seek to solve?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. I think that yes, we are perpetuating the problem, and yes, they're more alignable than they've been. It's a paradox as well. But I guess like I struggle to see 5 years out how we're going to do broad scale regeneration of Mother Earth, helping allow her to regenerate. How are we going to protect the remaining forests? How are we going to restore wetlands? How are we going to relocalize our food system effectively? How are we going to create ecological resilience so that people can have their basic needs met? How are we going to resettle in the face of huge climate refugee displacement? How are we going to do a whole range of activities without using tools of value exchange? And it's like language reduces the ineffable, right? Like, and yet we're not saying that like language is bad. Like it's a tool, and it seems to be some sort of evolutionary, emergent property, right? We're not the only species that has language. And just because it reduces something that like, the word plant can't possibly capture the essence of plant fully, but there's usefulness to having the ability for my vocal cords to express the word plant to you. And in many ways, that's how I see money. And, trade. I don't think that with 7 billion of us on the planet, that we're just going to somehow, want to collapse into a barter system. And as soon as we did, money would start to reemerge, right? And so, what are the effective ways that we can build the tools of money? And money is a tool in many respects. Money as a form of value exchange to help support coordination amongst human beings, that has a design that goes into it. There's an architecture, and how much money exists and how is it distributed and how does more money get created, and who starts with which portions of that money, and who gets to decide the rules of that, and rules like taxation, and so there's just a whole stack of things, and we now live in this complex economic system that is running us off the cliff. And a lot of the emergent properties that have evolved in our current economy are there for very valid and good reasons. But I think it's increasingly clear to a lot of us that this system doesn't seem to be compatible with the conditions for life. And so how do we change the money? How do we heal the money? And it's not going to be a one size fits all, just do a couple little acupuncture points. I mean, I think these are paradigm shifts, and these are, there's a plurality of different things going on. But by and large, what I'm learning is that the words regeneration and regenerative finance are common amongst lots of different circles and contexts and networks, and can kind of help cohere. And, regenerative finance was originally a term coined by John Fullerton, and probably many others. And it, at some point will phase out into some other, there's sustainable finance, and there's long lineages of people working in this space, and, famously Elinor Ostrom and people in the Commonsine and everything else. And so I think it's interesting that, we now have for the first time something that has escape velocity that we call crypto and Web3 to create new forms of money and value exchange through a digitization layer. And so that gives us enormous new surface area and speed and precision to experiment and redesign. And so we can create all of these new instruments, and we don't have to make it this binary conversation of like, well, we're just going to ditch the dollar and move to some cryptocurrency. There's already a plurality of monies and value exchange and financial instruments that exist on this planet. And now there can be even more. And we can start to really think more critically about how these are in service to nature and the current context that we're in.
You said crypto, and I imagine a lot of things you've experienced is environmental activists, people who are really climate aware, probably have a pretty negative perspective about the blockchain and cryptocurrencies. Famously, Bitcoin consumes an enormous amount of energy, and these rigs made from rare earth minerals. I am aware that layer 2s and the shift for Ethereum has reduced by a significant portion. Do you believe that cryptocurrencies and the underlying technology can be run in a way that is not ecologically destructive, or at least catastrophically destructive?
Yes. I think Ethereum and the proof of stake networks prove that we can do the consensus on blockchains at a radically fractional amount of electricity usage.
By how much less do you think?
Ethereum's shift from proof of work to proof of stake, it's calculated that it was something like 99.8% reduction in electricity.
Okay, that's a lot. Okay. And that's already done.
That's done. I mean, it's an incredible, achievement. We got into it a bit with the conversation with Aya from Ethereum Foundation. I think documentaries and movies will be made about this more in the future as people start to just appreciate, what a feat that was. But and possibly the largest decarbonization event in human history. Just random, interesting way to think about it. But I think that every action has trade-offs and consequences, and running, machines, even in a proof of stake network, requires rare earth minerals to build these computer devices, and that's going to have some ecological footprint and consequence. I think that trade is certainly well worth it in terms of the potential benefits of a distributed ledger system,
Mm.
whilst also holding the frame that, like, I think there could be a lot of negative consequences to blockchain and crypto more broadly. And Bitcoin, it's an interesting one because I think money is ultimately a meme, and store of value of a 21 million fixed supply currency, digital gold, has found resonance within the collective zeitgeist around the world, and brand recognition, and kind of an escape velocity at some level. And there are ways to more intelligently use energy that's maybe not, connected to the grid, and serving as much of a purpose to more cost effectively, find ways that can support other renewable energy sources. And, like, there's clever ways to try to kind of backfill and retrofit this particular monetary design into some useful properties. By and large, I think it's like that mid curve kind of meme, and I think that on the two sides, it's like it uses too much electricity. It's not a very elegant design, given that we know proof of stake is continually working in terms of a consensus mechanism. And I appreciate that people feel strongly that the strength of the energy itself being kind of transformed into a store of value is something that they feel more confident to place value in, and then therefore has more appreciation of value and store of value. And I think that there's valid critiques of proof of stake systems in terms of how they could end up being co-opted and attacked, if you will, in ways that doesn't have the same security properties as Bitcoin. I personally believe Ethereum has a more elegant architecture here and will stand at the longer test of time, and is fundamentally better, from a design perspective. And so that's my primary orientation, with all, due respect and appreciation for the profound breakthrough that Bitcoin was. I do like the phrase, the Bitcoin maxis are going to hate me, but Bitcoin was the idea, Ethereum is the execution.
All right. Hit us up in the comments, Bitcoin maxis. That moving away from crypto, to then thinking about the climate finance scope more broadly, right? Because crypto is just a mechanism for implementing some of these philosophies. There are other mechanisms, the carbon trading schemes, ideas around biodiversity, credits. There's also a profound concern about how carbon, which is this first sort of maybe prototype of an ecological currency, of a kind of nature-based currency, which had a lot of momentum behind it, a lot of enthusiasm from a lot of environmentalists. Early on, I certainly was like, yeah, carbon credits, let's get paid to plant trees. Like, what's wrong with that? And then you see, I think it was Kenya just sold something like 1/7 of its forests to the Emiratis for massive carbon offsetting. When I was in Ethiopia, I saw villagers who couldn't access their forest for firewood that they've been pulling from for millennia, because now it's a carbon project. So these profound social injustices, a perpetuation of our consumption pattern, because we're just going to offset our way, to a future that we want to live in. How do you think about the risks of environmental commodification as evidenced by the carbon markets, and then maybe some of the benefits that I didn't speak to in that little rant? What do you think?
Yeah, I am grateful that we're having this moment as a climate movement to really look at the perils of the first versions of the carbon markets, because there are a lot of things to learn and to dig through here. And so, yeah, I mean, we've had a number of conversations, and I won't cover off all of the different points. about, credits being retired versus traded, and, the opaqueness that's happened in terms of the methodology, the assumptions that go into kind of baselines and additionality, and the types of companies that are being benefited from these carbon markets. But I will, just observe that like a lot of these things are in the nitty-gritty details of like, well, who decides the regulations and the issuance of credits, and what nation states and, systems are we talking about, and how do we reach consensus as a scientific community? And so, that's got to be part of the discourse. And those things are all entangled in the ways that we do money anyway. So I think that the main conclusion I come to is that we need to have a design approach that is evolutionary and adaptive. And we definitely don't want to just get fixated on kind of a simplistic one-size-fits-all top-down solution. And I think a lot of the ecological context that we find ourselves in lends itself to a conclusion that we need to relocalize, focus on bioregions, focus on watersheds, redistribute power to the edges, understand how to restore civic society at a local level, because every place is different and every context is different, and people closest to the problems will have the best solutions. And we have a lot of repair and restoration to do because of the context of the last couple of generations and how much has been flattened and commodified and lost. So, yeah, in general, Gregory Landouet made a great comment in the discussion that I had with him about, we have to start somewhat with a recognition of how radical carbon markets are, that corporations in many ways are now kind of having a liability on their balance sheet for their emissions. And introducing liabilities for our ecological footprint could have, compounding and additional cascading, effects and ways to think about around, well, what is the effect you're having on biodiversity, and what's the effect you're having on water, and what's the effect you're having on soil. There's a huge, thrust of this conversation around how do we, think again through the lens of natural capital. We focus so much on GDP, so much on the P&L, so much on the flows. We forgot about the stocks. We forgot about, we've grown the economy like this, and yet our ecological natural capital is going like this, and our social capital in many ways is going like this. And so using the tools of accounting and money and financial instruments and trade and policy and so forth, can we redesign an economic system that rebuilds natural capital, that puts together policies that, is in service to those aims? So yeah, trying to kind of take like a binary, dogmatic, I'm for carbon credits, I'm against it, I'm hopeful, I'm skeptical. At this point, for me, feels a little bit naive, and I think there's just so much more nuance behind it.
And that ability to transcend the paradox is one of the great beauties of the long form independent media movement with podcasts. It's the ability to get past those clickbait headlines and that polarization of the feed into the subtleties. And I think you've done a tremendous job in yourself opening yourself to paradoxes that aren't necessarily your presupposition, to step into spaces that aren't where you come from, and are learning really quickly in how to hold those paradoxes in the dialogue. I, for one, have really enjoyed the Ma Earth series. I really recommend that people who are interested in a prosperous, beautiful future continue to tune in, including into those topics that aren't necessarily in their core assumption set, to find that other side of the paradox, to see where that is. So I want to thank you for the work that you're doing. It's so cool as your brother to see how lit up you are by this work. It's clear to me that you have a lot of energy for this, and I'm really excited to see where it goes. Do you have any final comments before we close?
Well, I'm glad you're excited because you're co-funding it. So,
well, that helps.
Yeah, I Well, I want to also just, give a nod to this space we find ourselves in. Give a nod to Billy Lewis, the steward of this space, and who's also been really instrumental in this project. And if you're finding us through social media and clips and some of those bite-sized forms of content, he's been the one doing that work. And there's just many hands that have gone into this. We're here at Mongaroa Farms, the team that built this space out and that stewards the land, and that has allowed me to go travel this year and to bounce around and kind of holding it down. And you and Catlin, who's very much the sister and your partner and wife on this journey, and your girls and mom and the family, and then we have the whole Biome Trust Fano. And so it's just to say, like, it feels a little silly because I'm in front of the camera and people have that context, and then there's like 30, 40, 50 people that are really doing so much of the work that enables this in different ways. And we didn't go deep on kind of like what else Ma Earth hopes to do and where is it going. And we talked a bit about the media side. And I don't know exactly what we'll do for season 3 to start to, kind of roll out the exciting new developments and announcements and things and features that we want to work on. But it's just to say there are some new things that we're cooking. And it's really about that fundamental core essence of how do we bring more capital into regenerative land projects, and how do we connect these dots a bit more and start to experiment with these tools a bit more. So stay tuned.
Yeah, excellent teaser. Maybe for a part 2 where we can dive into those conversations even further.
Yeah, and thank you, Bimo, for the great work sitting in the interviewer seat. You're a natural, and hopefully we'll see you there more.
Yeah, we'll see. Thank you. Thanks everybody at home, and for everybody involved. Thank you, Matthew. Big love.
Okay, I hope you got value from that. If you're still watching, thanks so much for being on the journey. This was our 100th conversation. I just want to give huge acknowledgments again to the team behind the scenes, all of the people who have made this project possible, all of the guests, all of the Airbnb hosts, all of the audience, listeners, viewers. Thank you so much. The feedback is continuing to fuel us. We're going to come back strong for more on season 3 and continue to make improvements, upgrades, and as I alluded to, release some new things on maearth.com. So make sure you follow, share, subscribe, join our newsletter. We are a part of a broader collective movement to realign our economic incentives with planetary health and well-being. Thanks again, and I'll see you on the next one.